So we would be certified to train social style. And then both Dan and I focused on social style in our dissertations. And so both of us did that. And I will also say that in my research, the very best publication that either of us ever had, Brad was the first author. It was in the Speech Monographs, which is the top journal. And that's still to this day my favorite article that I've ever had published. But almost the rest of them, for me, have been in social style.
And I think Bill and I were both possibly the first, but we were certainly among the earliest to conduct research on social styles other than the researchers at Wilson Learning. And my work focused on sort of essentially proving that these four styles were discriminate, very different styles of communicating, and why. So again, more Brad's mentorship and leadership and caring, and serving all along as a big brother. And then the last role I'll mention is really truly when I reflect Brad was a friend. He had all the characteristics of a friend. He was there when you needed him. He
Gave you advice.
Certainly would give him. When friends give advice, they're supposed to just listen to you. I don't know, but yeah, he expressed appreciation. He expressed confidence. He didn't criticize to the point of harming. He listened. He responded. I have to reflect back, and I didn't think so at the time. I thought of Brad on such a high professional, academic, and otherwise pedestal. I wouldn't have dared to think of him as a friend, but I do now. Brad is a friend.
One last story that you might appreciate is that when we were at West Virginia, we were no richer than we were back at Illinois State. And they had this pitiful amount of money that they paid you to teach and be a graduate assistant. And so Velma and Brad taught and nurtured us to be playing bridge. And so we couldn't afford to go anywhere. I mean, I met my wife at West Virginia, and our joke is, we didn't have a date, really, because we couldn't afford one. But we did play bridge with Brad and Velma, and Brad would bring a steak. Now, can you imagine for people? I'm not going to exaggerate here. My summer whole amount of food that I had in my house was rice, popcorn, and a big thing of peanut butter for dessert, 1 spoon. That's what we were living on. He had a steak, and if you won, if you had the most points at the end of the night, you went home with the steak. We were motivated. But he was kind also to those who might not do so well, so he also brought a pound of hamburger. And if you lost, you got the hamburger. So this made for a really interesting game of bridge, because halfway through you had to make a determination. Am I in it for the steak? So he probably fed us as well as nurtured us in many ways.
Final word, much to celebrate about Brad Lashbrook. Thank you, Brad. Here.
I'm going to add something here because I'm the legal brother here. Nobody else is legal. My mom, Maureen, back when my brother was in 5th grade, she's a den mother, and she taught 5th grade kids to play poker. And I know she taught Brad to play bridge. I give my mom more credit than these guys would understand. Chris, back to you. Anybody else? Anybody else? The stories are hard to match. There we go. Another guy. And explain why you have the right to be here. No, okay.
I have no right to be here. My name's Rodney. I met Brad in 1977 there at Arizona State. One of the things that was great about Brad was that he was invited often to come to different universities to speak, and a lot of us got to know him. One of the things I remember most about that was that he was just treating us fledgling master students like we were real people. And I guarantee you, none of our professors treated us that way at all. And my first memory of Brad, beyond just meeting him at that event where he was speaking, was at a conference in San Francisco where he did his critique in rhyme and meter. And I don't have to tell you anything else about that event. It just so impressed me that here I was with all of these hardcore quantitative, and here's Brad performing. And then he sang. Well, for an old theater major like me, this was just the hook. And I went on, every year at the conference, I would get a chance to visit with him and enjoy it. But I gotta tell you, the one thing I love the most about Brad, I mean, a lot of what Dan and what the fellow said is a ditto for me, but I was just a few years behind you guys. And he saved me from going to the wrong place, and then I did anyway. But when he came to San Jose in 84, 85, 86, somewhere around in there, we spent an awful lot of time together, going to the university club and coming to his house for a meal, or him coming to our house for a meal. And he taught me and my wife more about just living and just cooking salmon in the most great way, and doing things that we, as just barely out of graduate school, would never have thought of doing. And so I'll just leave it there and let you know that I really appreciated Brad for his friendship.
Anybody else? Like Chris, I keep thinking of stories here, but I love your story. I think Brad, Velma helped me on this. I think he wrote the lyrics to a sorority. He waited tables, and I'm a little boy, 7 years old probably, my mom was so proud. I knew Brad through my mom better than I knew Brad, but he wrote the lyrics while he was waiting tables for a sorority. And
not only that, he was waiting tables for a sorority. I can't remember the name of the story. Sigma.
Yeah.
85. And he wrote, what was their song? Sunshine?
Yeah.
He wrote a song for them that's still out there. In fact, we have a recorded version.
So when Wendy was singing, I just, and Nikki was showing her poems, it just goes back to this. It's all coming back. I need this more than you guys need this, so I appreciate you telling your stories.
And he also was a Hallmark card. Hallmark card.
Right.
Composing, cards, and he was called the regional romantic.
That's true. And back in my sports world, I think Brad, he was a very, very good high school long jumper, believe it or not. He was an incredible athlete too. He had a lot of athletic. You guys didn't know that because he never talked about himself as far as the past. Am I right? I think he did.
Hi, I'm Buzz, Darcy. My wife Kathy is Velma's sister, and I was honored to have Brad as a brother-in-law. And one of the things that always made me feel good is Velma and Kathy's dad was kind of a rough case. He was kind of a hard guy, and he was a little bit opinionated about things. And when Velma got ready to marry Brad, who had been a Catholic and had been divorced, that was rough stuff. And then I came along a few years later, had been a Catholic, had been divorced, and by that time, August, their dad, I think, had almost kind of given up the fight. But Brad was always there with a good word. I love when you did when Tilton said, because he would always do that. He'd be telling you a story or just describing something, and at the end he'd get that smile, and he'd come out with a zinger all the time. So a great man, a great person, and we all miss him. I do.
Chris has an egg story, and the reason this is so emotional for me is growing up in that house you saw on one of the slides in Kansas City, Kansas, even though Brad left early, it brings back a lot of emotion, so I needed this more than, like I said before, but Chris has a great story about Brad's relationship with his illegal stepdad, if I may, Velma, because it's never legalized. I don't know what we'd call George, but Chris, you got to tell that story.
I have it written down. It's actually in his words. So he was writing a memoir actually that he wrote to us, and me and my sister got to read it.
It's a great story. You got to hear it.
Several years. So this is the egg story. So my stepfather, George Lashbrook,
My dad.
Yes, he had an obsession with me learning the value of $1. The value in his mind was tied up in the work ethic, which correlated hard labor and ingenuity with business. He wanted me to be in an endeavor where my hard work would pay off in dollars and some cents. Thus, at the age of 16, he put me in the egg business. The idea was simple. Every Saturday morning, I was to take one of the farm trucks and drive to multiple feed stores with a 100-mile radius of Bonner Springs to collect eggs, which the local farmers had sold to the store on consignment. In this sense, a feed store was a part of a localized distribution center for the farm products not consumed by the farmers' families. I usually started my journey around 4 a.m., so as to start collecting eggs by the dozens at 5:30, when the feed store opened, I allowed 3 hours to make the rounds of the various places on my route. The objective being to have all the eggs collected by 10 a.m. so that I could return to Bonner by noon to start peddling my wares to our neighbors, house to house. As a door-to-door egg salesman. I was usually able to sell all my eggs by 4:30 so that I could return to the farm to complete my afternoon chores. I usually made about $35, with each dollar sufficiently valued to satisfy my father's lust for my learning. I soon realized that $35 wasn't anything but a killing. There had to be a more efficient way to sell eggs than door-to-door. I applied my ingenious thinking. Who uses eggs in large quantities, I asked myself. Bakers use eggs, and bakers work at and for bakeries. Could I develop a client list to buy my eggs? Yes, I could, if I searched for them beyond the confines of Bonner Springs. Now, Bonner was just 20 miles from Kansas City. So Kansas City, Kansas had 50 or so bakeries, during the weekends, I started to sojourn to the big city to line up clients for a Saturday Egg Fest. I remember it was a Saturday just before Christmas, 1952, when my partner and I acquired a partner once I started to make $50 a week selling eggs. This particular Saturday, we planned to buy eggs by the crate, 60 dozen, from the feed stores. We purchased 120 crates of eggs and loaded them onto our truck and headed toward Kansas City. It was snowing as we drove toward the killing. The highway was slick and we were driving a bit fast. Around Olaf, Kansas, we had an accident and flipped the truck. We were unhurt, but the cargo broke into many shells and yolks. My partner and I stood among the mass, ankle-deep in yellow goop, when a highway patrolman came to investigate. His car actually slid through the accident. The mess required a detour for other travelers on the highway. Beware of egg slides. A fire truck came eventually to clean up the mess, and order was restored. However, our big city clients were not thrilled, nor inclined to renew their contracts. The egg business ended once over easy.
One more farm story that's true, and Velma will appreciate this. My brother Damon, who died in '85, died of AIDS, and Brad was very supportive of Damon, and Damon was very much part of our life, and Brad was the big brother. But backing up to the farm after Brad left me on the farm. I'm 12 years old, and my brother's 14, and my dad had a combine, and we had a farm up in St. Joe, and we didn't have the transportation, so we had the caravan. And in those days, a combine, you know, those bridges were too small, so my brother would drive over in the Ford pickup. He was 14 years old, I'm 12 years old. And my dad, I'd be in the middle with my Massey Ferguson tractor and a trailer. It's a long drive. It was about 35, 40 miles from, so we drove all day, and we just got to the corner of the schoolhouse where we turned on the gravel road to get to the farm. And it was a long day, and my sister always said that if we had sweatshop rules before, when I was a kid, my dad would have been put in prison, but that's another story. But here's the story. Just imagine why Brad left the farm. The highway patrol came by. My brother turned left on the Ford truck, and my dad's about a half mile back, and I'm a quarter mile back, and we all pull over. Time the highway patrolman talked to my brother, who wasn't legal age. My dad got off the combine and says, "Is this your son?" Yeah, so he doesn't have a driver's license. Well, you know, we had to drive up there, and so he wrote out a ticket, and who knows how much it would have been in that days. And so, as the highway patrolman went off, my dad turned to my brother and said, "God damn it, I told you to sit up straight." So anyhow, it was a difficult, but it was a good story. Anybody else, Chris? Velma, can we break and enjoy? Do you want to say any more?
I'm sure there's some other people.
Yeah. Can I give the microphone to somebody? Don't be shy, they're good stories, and I need them.